That burning question of why do we do what we do what has led to the work I do now. That's about, I would say 80% of my business is innate drivers.
And are you unique in that? Like have you created that innate drivers?
Yes. Yep. I discovered it and then spent thousands and thousands of hours creating and refining and honing the process of it. So I know when Josh, when you came to see me on Friday, I talked about the origination story. And I don't want to spend all our time there, but I don't know. Do you think it's worth me at least saying a little bit about how I discovered innate
Mhm.
drivers?
Yeah.
I love the backstory for sure.
Okay. So the gist of it is when I'm doing public speaking, sometimes I'll start with, I don't mean to brag, but I have completed 3 marriages. So it's my claim to fame, right? So I was on my 3rd marriage. This was 2009. So I had already been coaching for about 7.5 years. And it wasn't going well. Had a 2-year-old together. And then my 3 children from my first marriage. And my then husband had called me from work saying, get the baby tended. We need to talk. So I knew it was serious. He came home, kind of blurted out, I'm miserable and I want a divorce. And I was really shocked that he wanted a divorce. He's a certain kind of person. And I honestly believed he would have never wanted a divorce, right? He's very much like you stick with what you start. And I was very hurt and very shocked. And I did the thing that sometimes we do as humans, where we get defensive. And in that defensive place, we list our own virtues. Always a hilarious thing. I'm sure it was ridiculous at the time, but I was just like, why would you want to divorce me? I'm amazing. It's according to what I care about, right? I am amazing. So I proceeded to say things like, the house is always spotless, the bills are always paid, I'm emotionally stable, the kids are happy, I'm loving, blah, blah, blah. The whole time I'm talking, I'm watching him get more and more frustrated. And then he finally just bursts out with, I would trade everything you just said for some security. And in that moment, I really believe I was primed for that moment, because here I am asking this question, why do people do what they do? And here's a human being, my husband, telling me security is everything to me. And so it was confusing to me, but because we were in the middle of a crisis, I didn't ask the correct question, which I'll get to. I asked it the next day. Instead, I was like, still in that defensive mode, you guys. And I was like, fine, I'm miserable too. You can have your divorce. Now it's his turn to defensively list his virtues. And they were very much about money. Like, I make good money. I have a lot of earning potential. I'm good with money. Now, I don't want to downplay that, because I do value stability in certain types of ways, but I did not get married for that. So I said to him, I would trade everything you just said for some connection. And now we have this, right? I got married for connection. He got married for security. We got married for 2 different reasons, not even consciously realizing the function we had assigned the other person to play. By the way, not an agreed upon function. I never agreed to, create security. He never agreed to create connection. So part of this work is looking at the function we assign the people in our lives, whether that's a spouse, a child, a parent. We do it a lot with our parents, no matter how old we are. So here we are at this crossroads of realizing that we have different whys, right? My why is connection, his why is security, at least part of it. So the next day, after we had decided to stay together, honestly, largely for logistical reasons, and the marriage did last another 7 years after that conversation, I asked the right question, which was, what do you mean by security? because I couldn't believe here was a man ready to walk away from his family over security, but wouldn't that make it less secure? And as I said to him, I'm so confused because we have money in the bank, we don't have a lot of debt, we live a very like stable life. And he's like, yeah, you're talking about stability. I'm talking about security. I need you to work a W-2 job, which, was never going to happen. And he basically, for him, I needed to understand what security meant to him. Consistency, predictability was really important to him, still is. And that's the thing. Well, I'll get into how these don't change much, but basically, comfort, peace of mind, those are the things that really matter to him. For me, I'm a risk taker. I'm an entrepreneur to the core of my being. I don't care about, I know that we're going to be fine 20 years from now. I believe that this realm doesn't offer certainty in that way. And I've made friends with that. I embrace uncertainty. So there was just this sort of fundamental mismatch. But on an even more fundamental level, I realized I had just seen behind some kind of curtain. I was like, okay, the fact that he was willing to leave over this, and then me questioning, why did I leave my other two marriages? Oh my word. Okay. Well, I left one of the marriages over this thing and the other one over this thing. So it's not just one thing. And I started to explore. At the time, explore sounds way too passive. I started to obsess. I am like an obsessive kind of a person when it comes to what I care about. And so I threw myself into the research. I was calling it core values because I didn't know what to call it. And core values was already a thing, mostly in a business kind of setting. But as I was studying, none of the work I was finding was personal enough. It was largely corporate based and it didn't go deeper. And I remember just having the thought like, no, these are the things you live and die for. These aren't shallow. These aren't, you won't have this at work and this at home. If autonomy, for instance, is a driver of yours, you will be driven at home and at work to have that autonomy. They might show up in different ways. They might have a different expression, but we are full beings. It's so weird to me because I work a lot in the corporate world. It's so interesting to me that people think, oh, these are a bunch of human beings that when they come to work, now they're a different human being. I'm like, no, your corporation is made up of human beings with emotions and needs and desires and drivers. So we're very much like whole people, no matter what we're doing. So yeah, as I really started to parse this out and put tons of work into it, I started realizing the questions that get to it. I started adding it to my coaching sessions I was doing at the time. And then it just grew and grew and grew from there as my own drivers refined and I understood who I was and why I cared about the things I cared about. And I started really aligning in the healthiest version of those. My life changed. It changed. I mean, really drastically changed and improved. And I was like, this is big. This is really big. And at that point, I had to change the name because people thought they knew what core values meant. So like Josh, the experience I had with you on Friday, you said, oh yeah, I've done my core values. And I'm like, what are they? And what did you say?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. Well then, right? It wasn't hitting deep enough. It wasn't integrating. It wasn't changing people's lives the way that it was being done that I saw. So here is the last piece of this before we kind of get into what exactly they are, whatever, is as I was studying core values online, I kept finding this research that showed that they have shown people are born and die valuing the same things. So obviously the expression of them shifts over time. If you look at my son, who's now 28, When he was 2, he wouldn't let me dress him. He wouldn't let me put him in his car seat. He had to get in his own car seat, buckle himself up. He dressed himself every day. Sovereignty is his number one. Well, now in his life, right? He's an anarchist. He will not be micromanaged by anybody. He follows rules when they make sense to him. He owns his own body. Like he is very much a freedom fighter. So 2, 28, same driver, obviously different expressions. Does that make sense to both of you? So yeah, the more that I refined it and honed it and figured out the right questions to ask it, and I just started seeing these huge results coming in people's lives. And from that point on, so 2016, so discovered in 2009, 2016 is when I just completely gave myself over to it. I was like, this is what I do. This is my expertise. This is what I'm writing the book on. This is what I'm reverse engineering the process for, so that I can train other people to do this in their coaching work or in their HR work or in their therapy and their teaching. And so it's really just grown since that point.
So the people that we have on this podcast, we ask them the question, what did society teach you would fulfill you? And then they strive to do those things. And at some point their body shut down, or divorces, or depression, because it feels like societally we've been given what
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What should drive us. And to your son, sovereignty doesn't fit in any corporate building or a picket fence. I mean, I'm sure you'll get to. Okay.
You're correct. Yes.
Okay. So this is paramount to discover individually what drives each of us.
A million times yes. And there's so much I could say about that. But here's the most important thing to know here is that absolutely we inherited what were the values, principles, drivers we should value. We inherited a world of that, every one of us, some of us more strictly than others, whether that's political, societal, family culture, religious, right? All of those things. The thing is, with your own individual innate drivers, they will still have been showing themselves, but the more restricted that you've been, the more they will be in the shadow. Okay, I'm going to give an example. So even talking about someone, who has let's say somebody has a driver of autonomy, but they live in a very controlling home where autonomy is not being granted. Not only will they feel extremely resentful and disconnected, what I see over and over again is they create a double life, right? The stricter the parents, the higher chance that that child's going to create a double life. And they will get real creative with it. They will create their autonomy somehow, and it's probably going to get weird because they're not able to do it in the light of day, in a healthy way. Does that make sense? So let's look at even maybe something like COVID, which was fascinating to see different values come out. We kind of had groups of people who really valued safety and people who really valued freedom. And I'm not trying to oversimplify, but we saw some of that. And I thought it was weird it got political. Politics have nothing to do with health, or shouldn't in this way, in my opinion, because again, we're driven by something. But what I saw was a lot of people who really do value autonomy kind of go underground. So they're sneaking to meet with their families, right? They're kind of doing their little underground thing to still get their autonomy, but we've got a little bit of a double life going on. So someone who cares about something like that is going to do it no matter what. but they can either do it in the shadow or the light. And I do think it's extremely destructive that we expect everybody to be the same. Like, we're all playing different games. You see it right and left. I see it in marriages all the time, where this person is like, you are so crazy. And this person's like, you are so boring. But maybe the boring person cares about stability, and maybe the crazy person cares about expansion. Right? And so we judge each other according to our own drivers, rather than going, oh, but I want to get curious about what does drive them. Here's this way that we can't seem to come together. Let's look at what's driving us. And we'll get more into that with couples and create something different together. But first and foremost, none of this work even will help until you know your own. So, I mean, Josh, because you came to see me on Friday, I'd love to hear something about, and I'm sure your listeners would too, something about your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you asked me specific questions on behaviors. What do I like? What kind of problems have surfaced in my life? And it feels like from all of that, you were able to gather ideas, and then you would say, is it more like this or more like this? And tell me, does this one fit into this other one? And so it can be, so for me, my top one is peace. And so in a million ways, whether that means staying quiet, people pleasing, yeah, really, those were kind of my go-tos of just not speaking up in my effort.
Which would be kind of in the shadow a little bit, right? Which is not to
Yeah.
judge you, but that's where you go, I'm not fully in my power with this. But I shared with you, Josh, that what I see in you and what I feel in your energy is this serenity, this tranquility, this centeredness that is so delightful to be around. And that's the light side of peace. How beautiful is that? You're a peacemaker. You create a life that is almost, I want to say, almost sacred in its expression. And so either way, you've cared about peace your whole life. It's just, am I in the light with it or am I in the shadow with it? And this is why I say, you don't choose who you are. You choose how true to yourself you are.
Mm.
If you were to try to force yourself to be someone who doesn't care about peace, that would be a real losing battle. But you can definitely work on evolving out of the imbalanced part of it or the disempowered part of it into the powerful part of it.
Well, I'm having this download of, because I'm always like, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm like trying to be better about being more assertive about things like that. And it's no wonder I don't get very far, because I need to know, because that's a shadow of whatever my innate driver is.
Right? You want to know why you're doing it. What is it that you're trying to get? If the thing we most want, we don't think is on the table, we will take the imitation of it.
Right.
So people pleasing is the imitation of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Just like codependence is the imitation of intimacy or connection. And the real irony about those imitations is not only do they not satisfy and fulfill us, but they actually block the real thing from coming in.
Mm.
So think about, Josh, if you were to like examine that, and I know that you're an introspective person, you could probably think of specific times when people pleasing actually blocked you from having true peace and true, lasting, sustainable peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say like 100% for me, at least, like all the time. Every time I people please, I can feel my soul being sucked out of me, because it's not the solution.
It's not every imitation is like that. So one of the things I deal with, because I deal with so many couples, is affairs, infidelities. And I swear to you guys, almost every time is because the person has such a deep need and desire for connection, intimacy, right? Relating, full presence, something along those lines. This isn't to justify any of that. This is to make us feel less crazy and stupid.
Mhm.
Right.
That
As
we
you're saying all that, it's like just like so putting glasses on, it's like you can see so clearly. It just makes so much sense what you're saying.
And what I can tell these wonderful people who are usually in a lot of pain about this is I can say, so here's the thing is what we know is that having an affair, although it may give you temporary connection or the feeling of it, it's not sustainable. And at the end of the day, it's probably really threatening the connections that actually mean the most to you.
Right.
So it's not a judgment. It's almost like the reality of cause and effect that we can now see more clearly once we're able to courageously, it is courageous to get this clear
Mm-hmm.
because your whole life will kind of flash before you as you realize what you've done, how it's impacted you, but now you understand yourself. And there's great relief. The day I realized why I had been divorced 3 times, as someone who doesn't see myself as someone who would do that, and I'm not a crier, and I sobbed. The relief I felt from knowing why I had done that, both why I had married those men in the first place and why it had ended, was it was so liberating because then I wasn't afraid of doing it again. And I'm now like happily married doesn't begin to touch what I am. Like bliss, absolute and total bliss. I joke that I'm trying to get the coined phrase 4th time's a charm. It hasn't caught on yet, but it's gonna someday. But I really credit Innate Driver's work for that because coming in with a full understanding of who I am and what lights me up and nourishes me, and knowing what I was doing before was looking for one piece of that.
Right.
And we have a tendency to make some of our a lot of our choices from our first innate driver. And mine is workability. Connection ended up being my number 2. So because I had such a deep desire for workability, I found men who were good providers, very clean, orderly, stable in that way. We had, like, again, bills were paid, house was spotless, ignoring the other things I needed because that number 1 stands out so much, like Josh, for you with peace. In trying to get peace, I guarantee that you have threatened those other drivers of yours. But until we know that, we don't know how to deliberately make our choices from our whole selves.